I understand, yeah. I want to thank everybody for coming out to our Somatize, a Great Nation event. To get us underway, publisher Chris Milligan is going to perform a ceremony. And I'll let him explain, and we'll get started.
Thank you all for coming. And one thing that I wanted to do, and I was very glad that Matt called me up one day and he says, hey, you want to come down to La Luz de Jesus Gallery and do something? And I said, sure. And he says, well, why don't you come on 420? And, you know, because we have some books about marijuana and stuff. And then I says, do you know 420 is also Easter? And he said, no. And he looked at his calendar and says, yeah. And I says, well, good. Because, you know, marijuana is an amazing herb, okay? And cannabis is very much mentioned in the Bible, okay? And it is the main part of the anointing oil that was used, okay? And Christ basically means the anointed one, and that's what they used, okay? And one thing I'm going to do is, I've been a lucky fella. I've been a very, very lucky fella. And I got to be made a member of the Mandan tribe of Big Sandy Lake, Saskatchewan, Canada. And the Mandans are an interesting tribe. You can actually read in some books where they're extinct because they got poison blankets in the 1830s. Well, some of the people were in the fort and they heard about the plan of the poison blankets and they told some of them, and a bunch of them, instead of sitting around waiting to be killed by the poison blankets, split. Okay? And the Mandans, they ended up living way up outside Canada there, and even when Lewis and Clark went through, there was blonde-haired, blue-eyed Mandans. And the Mandans are a very, very interesting tribe, and they when they were in Canada, one of the gentlemen there went around the world in the early teens, and he went through India, and he picked up cannabis and declared it to be one of the sacred herbs of the Mandan tribe. Okay, and so one thing I want to just basically say is that marijuana is more than just getting high and just getting stoned. Okay, and so I'm going to take some Damiana, which is one of the sacred herbs of the Mandans.
Please pass it around.
And I'm going to put a little bit of that in this bowl. And then I'm going to take some lobelia, which is another sacred herb of the Mandans, and put that in this bowl. And then I'm going to take some cannabis, some marijuana, some pot, some hooch, and I'm going to put it in this bowl. And one thing that the Native Americans do, and you know, there was a point in time that legally in this country, Indian religions, both from Shiva and Hindi and American Indian religions, were not considered legitimate. And it was from a judgment by Justice Marshall in 1825, and he based it upon a papal bull, okay? And up until Smith versus Oregon, okay, that thing stood. But since Smith versus Oregon, Indian religions have a standing. They're just as good as white man religion, okay? And one thing that the Indian religions, they talk about it. If you go to peyote meetings and whatnot, is smoke carries prayers. Okay? And when it gets right down to it, that is the biggest tool that we have is prayer and good thoughts. And think about a good thing about the future. Okay? So what I'm going to do is just pour some of this on here and let the smoke go up. And I'm going to ask everybody to, say some silent prayers. Say some good prayers. Because, again, these herbs are what our mother gave us. Okay? And these herbs can save the world. Okay? And again, the point is that happy 420. I'm very glad that everybody is here. And, another thing we're going to do today is we're going to have, we've got some authors here to tell us some truth. Okay? And then I've been hanging out in this land of trying to tell the truth and publish these things. And if I just did that, I'd go nuts. So one thing I do to keep myself sane is to play music. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some crazy truth, okay? And then we're going to have some fun and play some music, okay? We're open. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to change a little bit here, and I'm going to talk to you about Prime Day, and I'm going to talk to you about fleshing out skull and bones, and I'm going to talk to you about my daddy, okay, because that's why I'm here, okay, because my daddy, he got involved in intelligence at the age of 18 as an exchange student at the University of Shanghai in China. He then went through a bunch of intelligence, got involved in deep politics in World War II, was in OSS, was in COI, was in CIA at the beginning. He rose high up through the ranks. His last overt job was branch chief, head of all of East Asia Analysis Office. And then he went covert for some time. Then I was a little kid. We moved around. Dad was doing these odd jobs, and all of a sudden he became a vice president of a college in Tennessee. I was a little kid, moved with him to Tennessee. We were there for a couple of years, and then he moved the whole family out to Oregon. Okay? And that was 1959. In 1969, I was, day before my 20th birthday, my dad sat me down, and he looked at me, took me in my little brother's room, brought in a professor from Vanderbilt, Dr. D.F. Fleming, looked at me and he said, the Vietnam War is about drugs. There's these secret societies behind it. Okay, I'm a teenager, I'm growing my hair long, it's the late 60s. I know more about drugs than my daddy does, I figured, And then this little light bulb, and then he says, and communism's all a sham, these same secret societies are behind it all, it's all a big game. At that point in time, I think my dad's nuts, okay? And then this little light comes on my head and says, oh, Dad's giving me the drug talk. He's telling me, stop smoking pot, okay? But, so I straighten up and I'm sitting there waiting for him to tell me stop smoking pot. But he doesn't do that. He continues to tell me about his intelligence career. And this is something that he had never, ever, ever done. I mean, it hadn't ever been mentioned in the family. And so he started telling me that this 1969, he's telling me that they're playing out a lose scenario in Vietnam. He's telling me that they're doing this whole Vietnam thing to lose. Okay? And then he starts talking to me about psychological warfare and propaganda and stuff. And it soon became very apparent that I have no idea of what they're talking about because I have absolutely no frame of reference to it. And so we talk some more, have some other talks, and then in one of these talks, in an argument, my dad started, he tells me, he says, they're out to opiate your whole generation. And you know, so I think about that a little bit, and I said, Dad, you know, I like to smoke a little pot, maybe take some acid. I don't, you know, I don't do that, okay? And so we continued to talk, and I started to do research on a subject I call CIA drugs, okay? And to make a little bit of a long story short, my dad ended up dying in 1990. I came across a book by Anthony Sutton called An Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones in 1986. And that finally made sense to what my dad had told me about communism was all a sham, it was all a big game, because that never made sense to me because I was ducking under the school, you know, a school in the desk to, because the Ruskies were going to bomb us, and I just could never get my head around that. So I read Sutton's book, and late 1988, my dad died early 1990, and he was real ill. I never really got to talk to him. I'm going through his papers, and I see this trip in 1956 where he'd been in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and I was doing studies on CIA drugs, and I wanted to know how big Chiang Mai was. Well, I see he'd been there, and so I could ask my mom. So next time I see my mom, I ask my mom, I say, how big was Chiang Mai in 1956? Because I hear it was a small village then, and now it's the second largest city in Thailand. It's built on heroin. Okay, all the banks have branches there and everything. And so she said, oh, it wasn't very big. Biggest thing in town was a church, and she had a picture of it. So, and she says her picture book's up there. So I'm pulling down her picture book, and Mom says, oh, by the way, that's when I stopped, she says, and that's when I stopped believing everything I read in the newspaper. And my mother was a very good CIA wife. She said, you know, she would never tell me anything, and that perked up my ears, and I says, Mom, what do you mean? And she says, well, because when we'd been in Toi Ninh, Vietnam, which is also the home of the Cao Dao cult, they had gone from there to Bangkok and then to Chiang Mai, and when they were in Bangkok, and the big story in the newspaper was there was a battle right where they had been in Vietnam. And she says, there was no battle, we were having a picnic, okay? And so I'm looking at my mom's picture book, and there's Chiang Mai, and there's the church, and yeah, it's not a very big village. And I'm turning back the pages, and there's my father with this gentleman by the name of Colonel Lansdale, who was a psychological warfare officer, among other things. And they're obviously having a picnic. And there's this beautiful picture of my mother, and you can see Lansdale there, and these guys in camos and black berets and stuff. And they're having a picnic, and out from the side it says Eudora, my mother's name, Eudora, out from Saigon with Colonel Lansdale and North Vietnamese military leaders. Okay? So why do you have a picnic and tell the world you're having a battle? Okay? You do that so that then the people in the villages, they got to choose sides. Who you for? Who you for? See, that's a big part of the psychological operations. They're always trying to get you to choose sides, okay? Because as soon as you've chosen a side, you can be manipulated up the wazoo, okay? And so, you know, they have a picnic. They tell the world they're having a battle. They harden the sides, okay? Pretty soon we have a war there. And this meeting that my dad had with Colonel Lansdale just happened to be right after Colonel Lansdale had taken the Golden Triangle away from French intelligence, okay, which was the source of the heroin, okay? So the Vietnam War was about drugs, okay? And we sent American boys and girls to hell for 1 year, okay? Those American boys and girls knew that once they got home, you know, they survived the year, they got to go home, okay? Well, some of those boys and girls got addicted to the heroin that was being proffered to them by almost anybody that was above 12 years of age, okay? Why were they doing that? Because they wanted